In this episode of FullDroopTV, we get more power out of Project Silverado with a new air intake and exhaust. Then Project Desert Ranger gets a new tire carrier. FullDroopTV starts now. This episode of FullDroopTV is brought to you in part by Air Raid.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of FullDroopTV. We have the fabrication completed on our Silverado, and now it's time to add some horsepower. When you're thinking about an engine, think about it as just a giant air pump. The more air you pass through it, the more horsepower and torque you're going to be building. And the easiest way to get those horsepower gains is with a new intake and exhaust system, and we'll be showing you just how easy it is to install those. Also in this episode, we're going to be fabricating a brand new spare tire mount for one of our older projects. Now, if you've tuned into any of our past episodes, you might have seen us use on this Silverado a Y-shaped ratchet strap to hold our spare tire down. Our new mounting system is going to integrate a spare tire jack, and it's going to be fabricated out of tube steel. So the first place to start today is with the intake we got from Air Raid. When we were looking for an intake for our Silverado project, we contacted Air Raid because we've used their intakes on previous projects and we're quite happy with the results that we got. Their kit features a brand new reusable air filter, a new air box to replace the factory one, intake tube, and all the couplers you need to get this into your Prerunner. So the first place to start is to remove the factory intake.
Remove the factory engine cover by lifting up on the front and then pulling the cover towards the front of the vehicle. Separate the factory intake tube from the plastic clamp that secures the radiator hose to the tube. Loosen 3 hose clamps, one at each end of the factory intake tube and one at the end of the mass airflow sensor. Slide the factory intake tube off of the mass airflow sensor and the throttle body. Disconnect the plug from the mass airflow sensor. Remove the factory airbox. You can see the difference between the factory air filter and the one that comes with the Air Raid intake kit. The factory air filter is all paper and it's just really restrictive. Now the Air Raid filter has a lot more surface area, so you know it's going to flow a lot more air. To mount the new Air Raid airbox, you're going to use these 4 10mm bolts that hold down the factory intake base. You remove these bolts, put in the new Air Raid airbox, and reuse these bolts in the same location. Using the supplied hardware, we're going to be installing the filter adapter. Reinstall the factory mass airflow sensor and don't forget to plug it back in. Using the supplied hose clamps, we're going to be installing this coupler to the mass airflow sensor. Air Raid supplies you with a new breather line to go from the intake tube to the valve cover on the motor. They give you this barb fitting that's already pre-threaded. You just thread it right into the actual intake tube, tighten it up with a 14mm wrench, then you can run the new line from that barb fitting directly onto the valve cover. We've installed the second coupler provided by Air Raid onto the new intake tube. This side will actually go onto the throttle body, and this side will plug in over by the mass airflow sensor. Now that we have our air filter in place, the last step in installing this intake is putting this rubber gasket around the top of the air box. That way it'll seal when the hood comes down. Total install time for one of these air raid systems is about 30 minutes, and all it requires is simple hand tools. So if you're looking to get more horsepower out of your Prerunner, visit airraid.com. We have a lot more air coming into our engine thanks to our air raid intake. With all that air coming in, we need a way to get it out, and we're going to do that with this exhaust kit from MagnaFlow. MagnaFlow offers a variety of different configurations. We chose their off-road version. Basically, this turn down comes right out of the muffler. The reason we chose this design over a conventional tailpipe design is the tailpipe would go over the rear suspension. Being that we have a long travel suspension on our Silverado, we need that extra clearance. That's why we chose this style. MagnaFlow builds a really high quality exhaust kit. They use all mandrel bends so you get really smooth airflow. The entire kit is made out of stainless steel so you never have to worry about rust. They also design into their kits to use the factory mounting location. Essentially, to install it, you slip all the pieces together and they provide you with these really heavy duty clamps. You clamp these down and there's no welding required for install. The first thing we need to do is get rid of the factory exhaust system. And don't be intimidated by this because there's literally only 2 bolts that hold this thing on. The rest is all just regular hangers. We're going to start the install by installing this first main tube in the direction that the exhaust flows. We're going to slide it in above the cross member, into place, and reuse the factory fasteners. We're really happy that MagnaFlow offers this off-road configuration because it really caters to pre-runners. Not having to route the exhaust over the rear axle gives us plenty of room for our long travel suspension.
Now that we have our air raid intake and MagnaFlow exhaust kit installed on our Silverado, we want to squeeze even more horsepower out of this 5.3. And if you have a computer-controlled truck, the easiest way to do that is with a tuner. So we contacted Superchips from one of their flashpack tuners. Now, once you get your tuner, you're going to want to visit their website so you can register it. Doing that will give you the ability to download their latest tunes. And all you have to do is plug it into your computer using this USB port. Now, Superchips offers a variety of different tunes that you can choose from. One is a fuel economy mode, one's a towing mode, one's 87 performance, and one's a 91 octane performance. Now all you have to do is just plug it into your truck, follow the steps that come up on screen, and it's really that easy. We're taking a break from our Silverado project, and we've got this Ford Ranger Prerunner in the shop today. A little while ago we fabricated this bed cage, and it was designed to use a Y-shaped ratchet strap to be able to hold our spare tire down. That did a good job for us as far as holding the tire down, but it never gave us a place to mount our jack. So today we're going to be fabricating a new system that's actually going to pivot off this tube here and land across the tire, so it'll lock our tire in, and it'll give us a place to mount our jack. It'll be able to pivot up with the jack still in place so that we can access our spare tire, and laying it down will lock everything in place. So the first place to start is prep this tube so that we can start fabricating the pivot points.
We're going to be using a plasma cutter to cut off the old tab. Then we'll come back and clean it up with a grinder, as well as just remove all this old paint. We're just about ready to get our tabs tacked in place. We wanted to show you guys that I have the sleeve here bolted between the two tabs, but I've also added 2 washers on either side. That way, after I get this tacked in place, I can remove the bolt and remove those washers. That'll give me a little bit of extra play, so that way when this is all reassembled, this sleeve will pivot freely between the 2 tabs, allowing our spare tire mount to pivot up and back down. We've cut out this paper template to give you guys an idea of how this whole system's going to work. Now, before we cut it out of steel, we wanted to show you that we're going to make a tube structure that runs up and over the top of the tire. That'll actually pinch down, holding the tire in place. Now, when we need to access our spare tire, this whole assembly will pivot off of these 2 points and rotate completely back out of the way. That way we have access to our spare tire, and then when we're done, we'll just flip it right back and lock it down. Using our paper template, we've determined where our bend points need to be. We've transferred those lines onto our steel. Now, normally you would use a sheet metal brake to make the bends in the material, but you can achieve the same result with a vise, and we're going to show you how to do that. Now that we have our bracket bent, we've got it in place, and we're going to tack it so that way it doesn't move when we make any of our measurements for the frame to hold the spare tire down. We've got the tubes cut out that are going to make up the frame that our jack is going to mount to. We're using this magnet to hold the corner joint at 90 degrees. Once we get this welded up, we'll take it back to the truck and tack it to the pivot bracket. Now that we have everything tacked in place, I'm going to remove this entire piece and take it back to the welding table. Once I get it over there, I'm going to do a nice flat plate across the top of this tube structure for the jack to mount to. Once I get that and everything finished welded, I'll get it back on the truck. We're using 14 gauge steel for the top plate on our jack mount. Now we're going to use a plasma cutter to cut this out. Whenever you're making long cuts with a plasma cutter, it's a good idea to clamp a piece of tubing so you can use it as a guide to follow and give you a nice straight line. We have our top plate tacked in place, and we're going to weld it on using a method known as stitch welding. Now what that is we're going to weld 2 inches, leave a 2-inch gap, and then continue that same pattern all the way around the piece. Now when you do it, make sure you stagger the welds. You don't want to warp this panel. That's the reason for stitch welding. You're only heating up a small amount of this top plate at a time. Now that we have the plate welded into the top of our frame, I've set the jack in place, and we notice that the wheel in the front actually holds the frame of the jack up, whereas in the back, it doesn't. And visually, we just didn't like the way it looks. It looks unlevel. So to correct that, I cut this piece of rectangular tubing out, and I'm going to use it as a shim along the back side to keep the jack frame nice and level with the spare tire carrier. Now, while I was at it, I decided to cut out some of these hooks. These hooks are going to go in place just like that. And what they'll do is they'll locate and secure the front of the jack once it's slid into place. All that's left is to get these pieces welded in. To finish off the front of our jack mount, we made this boxing plate. It's going to slide in like so. It's going to give us some more added strength and style.
Our spare tire hold-down system with integrated jack mounts completed, and one of the things that we did when we were designing it was we wanted to make it so it mimicked the styling that we had in our bed cage. You can see we've got fully boxed upper shock mount here, and we mimicked that design in our front capture for the jack. Now it's strapped in, the jack isn't going anywhere, the spare tire is secure, so now we know that if we're stuck out in the desert with a flat, it'll be easy to change.
FDTV Talk is presented by Prerunner Maniac.
Welcome to FDTV Talk, where we answer your questions. And today's question comes from Mike, and he asks,
Hi, I have a 2005 four-wheel drive F-150. I was wondering if you guys could recommend a long travel kit for me, please?
That's a great question, Mike. And for our recommendation, we'd go with this long travel kit from Dixon Brothers Racing. The kit fits 04 to 08 F-150, so it'll work perfectly on your 05. Now with this kit, you get fully boxed lower control arms that are 4.5 inches wider per side. It's also got location for your lower shock mount and the limit strap. You get these tubular upper control arms and these fully boxed shock mounts that mount right to the factory location. Now another unique feature of this kit is this engine cage. It passes over the engine and ties in the two upper shock mounts together for added strength. So if you want more information about this kit, just visit FullDroopTV.com. And while you're there, if you have a question that you want answered on air, click on the FDTV Talk icon. And that does it for another episode of Full Droop TV. We've got our air raid intake installed along with our MagnaFlow exhaust kit, and the tune we've got from our flash pack from Super Chips ties it all together. Now we can't wait to get this out in the desert and see what it does with all this extra horsepower we've got. So until next time, we'll see you in the dirt. Hey, thanks for
We'll slip it in place, and I can't slide it in that way.
have a place of solidity. Give us a good place to, and I don't know where to go with that.
We've cut out this paper template to give you guys a little...
Vroom, vroom.